28 minutes past 11 Central African Time here on Channel Africa, the voice of the African Renaissance, and the program is African Dialogue with myself, Zeenat Abdool, and on the technical side it's Katleho. We'll be with you up and until 12 noon this afternoon. Thereafter, regular current affairs programming resumes. But this morning on African Dialogue, which is the program that you're listening to, we are talking about environmental issues, and we're talking specifically to Umvoto Africa, which is an earth sciences consultancy organization that's based here in South Africa, Cape Town, and what they specialize in is water services, but also in terms of policy and water affairs, and that informs policy regulations and so on in government spheres. But also we're speaking to Andiswa Mlisa from that organization with regards to what she specializes in, and that is geographic information systems. And if you've just tuned in, you missed the discussion that we had a bit on groundwater and the importance of groundwater, and how it is being used for irrigation purposes, and in some instances, the water quality is so good it is drinkable. Also perceptions with regards to groundwater and so on. And these were things for staying on the line there with us. Just very quickly, in terms of what it is that you do at Umvoto Africa, it's understood that you specialize in geographic information systems. Can you unpack that for us, please?
Geographic information systems, simply put, it's a combination of the IT technology as we know it, your computers, the information systems within the computers, like the databases that you have. What makes it geographic compared to your normal databases that you normally have is that now you add a spatial component to your data. So for banks, for example, a simple one would be normally they keep records of who their clients are and what their bank balances are. But now when you go and put it in your geographic information system, you also need to know where those clients are. Right. So they can easily do an analysis of where their clients are based, therefore where do they need to have an extra ATM, right, or where do they need to have an extra branch, for example, based on the analysis that they're doing in a geographic information system.
So in your case, what do you do?
It's actually almost the same thing, because for groundwater analysis studies, but let me first say this at the beginning, is with groundwater and geographic information systems, or earth observation, because that's another link that we've got within the geographic information systems, will be that none of what we use most of the time in our systems, because we cannot see the groundwater, right? Mm-hmm. So we're more dependent on the indicators. So what's actually out there that we can use to tell us that there's groundwater.
So what are the indicators that can indicate that there is groundwater in the specific location?
You're looking at the type of rock that you've got, so you need a geology map. So that's the first start for us on the GIS side. Before we can tell a client that, yes, you've got groundwater or not, or before the hydrogeologists can start working, they'll come to the GIS team and say, this is the area we're interested in. What do we have? What do we know about this area? So we will start with a simple layer of the geology. What is the geology in the area? Mm-hmm. And that tells them what type of rock they expect, and therefore does the rock hold water, which means is it an aquifer or not, which is like, is it an aquitid? So that's just the basic one. So we use the geology. We also use vegetation, because various vegetation growth and in terms of the seasons that they're growing on can tell you whether they're being fed by rainfall or whether they're being fed by groundwater. So, for example, the springs, where the springs are located, that gives us an indication that there is a groundwater source in the area. It might not necessarily be where the spring is discharging, where you want to drill. Of course, the environmentalists won't allow you to do that. But it does give you an indication that within that region you do have groundwater potential.
Okay. What exactly is the uses of groundwater? Apart from, we're talking about boreholes and so on, and in terms of droughts and flooding and that, what would you see some of the uses of groundwater?
I think it's simple, the basic human needs.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's starting from drinking purpose to the farming industry uses quite a lot, and also even with the golf courses, because most of the time where there's golf courses, they normally use groundwater because they use so much water that the surface water allocation, they cannot get enough. So private developers normally also go the groundwater route, so they'll develop boreholes in the area and so forth. So, but in terms of the basics, it's just for people to drink and for farming purposes.
That sounds quite interesting. The uses of groundwater in the relation to golf courses. Never knew that. But also in terms of, so in other words, I mean, what you're highlighting or what you're pinpointing is the use of technology together with the environment, and they having a mutually symbiotic relationship.
Oh yes. One of the projects we've got in Hermanus, the well area, for those who know Cape Town. In Hermanus, we're developing a well field for the municipality. But one of the key things that came up is because the municipality is close to what part of the area of the municipality is one of the key nature reserves in the country.
Right.
And where we were looking at the potential areas for us to access the water is actually within the nature reserve. So the aquifer that we'll be using is the same aquifer that could be feeding, and I'm saying could be feeding the vegetation in the nature reserve. So one of the key things we had to do was to come up with tools to monitor the ecology in the area to make sure that it's not groundwater dependent. That when we're abstracting the water for the municipality, we're not going to find that the fynbos is dying or certain plants are dying all of a sudden.
Right.
So we developed a GIS and Earth observation tool by using satellite images to map out the signatures of the vegetation in the nature reserve, and went out to the field, because you always have to do your field verification.
Absolutely.
And we went out to the field to actually find out that the signatures that were picked up using certain methodologies, where we said if A and B are together, then we're likely that this is going to be a spring or this is a vegetation that's groundwater dependent. We went and checked it out. Does it correspond?
Yes.
And where we found that it's likely, yes, it does correspond, we termed those our monitoring sites. And we've been monitoring it. So when we're doing the abstraction, we're building the abstraction record, and we're also building a monitoring record in terms of how that vegetation is performing, whether we're abstracting or we're not abstracting. And so far, after about 4 years of monitoring, we found that they're not groundwater dependent.
Okay.
But we haven't stopped the monitoring anyway. We still want, because the ecologists actually like the tool now that we've used, so they're continuing the monitoring on their own. But it was quite useful because the challenge between having the water used for human consumption and the water being available for the ecosystem is quite a tense conversation in the country. So we do need to come up with various methodologies and technologies to make sure that the bridge is gapped, because people need the water as much as the vegetation needs the water. So we have to find a common ground. And one of the key things is to actually say, let's monitor it and let's put measures in place that if we find that there's an impact, we will stop. Things like, and it works in Hermanus.
Interesting. What about fracking? Because I mean, one of the criticisms that has led or that has formed part of the debate on fracking within the Karoo, which is also along the garden route. Well, actually, not really amongst the garden, but through the mountains and so on, is the issue of fracking and drilling through rock. Which I mean, you're saying that there's groundwater which is within rock. Does fracking for shale gas impact on groundwater as well in your groundwater explorations?
I am definitely not an expert.
That's just out of curiosity.
I've been in the discussions, and our technical director, Chris Hadnady, is the one who's doing all the studies on this for us. But what I've learned, listening to the various discussions, especially the conferences, is that there is a fear amongst the groundwater community, especially because where the fracking is being suggested in the country, proposed is in the Karoo.
Right. Water stress.
There is a water resource shortage already in the Karoo. There is a whole lot of dependence on groundwater in the Karoo. So if it were to be contaminated, the scale of impact is really big and in a bad way. So there is the fear that the fracking might contaminate the water. But again, I think it's also, for me personally, my stance with fracking is that no one has the answers. No one knows for sure that the groundwater will be contaminated. We don't know, and therefore the approach, especially because we're scientists, the approach will be how can we do it in such a way that we get the answers we want and we have as less impact as possible. So if I correlate the whole discussion on fracking with the whole discussion on groundwater, for me it's actually parallel, because for decades people have been saying you cannot abstract groundwater because it's going to impact the environment. And we're saying, but you can if you do it right and if you monitor it and things. So there's the two counter arguments within fracking, and I'm more falling into the sides of like, until we've got the answers to the questions we've got, we can't really say it definitely is going to happen.
Is groundwater also being impacted by changing climate, so climate change?
Yes, in the sense of the recharge part, because, the water... The water does need to be replenished in the ground.
Right.
So if there's no rainfall, we're not sure how much the water that we can access, because a huge part of the groundwater we cannot access because it's just too deep, and the drilling technologies that are available cannot go that deep unless we can try and tap into the oil industry technologies. So there is that effect, especially for people who are dependent on shallow aquifers, because the shallow aquifers are really dependent on rainfall in terms of the recharge.
Right.
So in that sense, yes, they are impacted by climate change.
All right. Well, Andiswa, we're going to pick up on this discussion after this break that we're going to take for a sports update. And when we come back, we're going to be talking with you with regards more to groundwater and also them being used as a solution maybe towards water shortages that we're likely to experience in the Southern Africa region. And of course, like you said, I mean, there is a risk in everything that we do, but if we do it correctly, then we do stand a chance of mitigating the risks. So of course, we're going to pick up on those issues after the sports update, which is coming up now with Tammy. Stay tuned to Channel Africa, the voice of the African Renaissance, and of course the program African Dialogue.